and welcome to the lecture series on Introduction to Indian Philosophy. And today I'll explain more on the teachings of Gautam Buddha. If you remember, in my previous lecture, I discussed the life of Buddha as is given in the Tripitakas. The Tripitakas are the Pali texts of the Buddhist tradition. Pali is a language somewhat like Sanskrit and was spoken by the Buddha. The Tripitakas literally mean the three baskets, which basically refer to the classification of the Pali texts into three baskets or divisions. One is Vinaya Pitaka, which is the basket of discipline. It contains the rules or the code of conduct for the believers of Buddhism. It consists of three books. The first is Sutta Vibhanga, which contains the rules for the monks as well as for the nuns. The second book is called Khandaka, which in turn consists of two volumes. Volume 1 explains the awakening of the Buddha and his 10 chief disciples, and Volume 2 speaks about the two councils that happened after Buddha's death. The third book is called Parivara. It explains and analyzes the rules mentioned in the first two books. The second of the Tripitakas is the Sutta Pitaka, which is the basket of discourses. It contains the sermons of the Buddha, and therefore it is regarded as the most important among the three baskets. Although there are disagreements within the tradition and the philosophers about the authenticity of these being the actual teachings of the Buddha, since these were written much later after the death of the Buddha. Anyway, there are around 10,000 teachings of the Buddha in the Sutta Pitaka. It is subdivided into 5 parts called the Nikayas or collections. They are the Digha Nikaya, which are the long discourses, then Majjhima Nikaya or the middle length discourses, then Samyutta Nikaya or the connected discourses, then there is Anguttara Nikaya or the numerical discourses, and Khuddaka Nikaya or the minor collections, which include sermons, doctrines, and even poetry attributed to Buddha. Now, the third of the Tripitakas is the Abhidhamma Pitaka, which is the basket of philosophy. It is in fact considered as the guidebook for those who seek truth. It contains philosophical explanation of the nature of mind, matter, and time. Then Abhidhamma literally means transcendent principles. So it is basically a specialized treatment of the basic principles of nature, which go beyond the understanding of the common people. It consists of 7 books, the first of which is called Dhamma Sangini. It is about the classification of Dhammas. The second book is called Vibhanga, and as the name suggests, it deals with the division. For example, the division of aggregates into 5. Then the third book is called Dhatu Katha. It is a discourse on elements. The fourth is Pugala Pannati. It is a book on persons, and it talks about the characteristics of the person in the different stages of Dhamma. The fifth book is Kathavattu, and it is about the points of controversies that emerge from the doctrines of the tradition. The sixth is Yamaka. It consists of pairs of converse questions along with their answers. And the seventh book is called Patthana. It deals exhaustively with the causal conditions and gives a list of 24 causal conditions. I will give one as an example from the 24 causal conditions. It is about how our thoughts and feelings emerge. It is mentioned that lobha, which is attachment, and alobha, which is non-attachment, then dosha, which is aggressiveness, and adosha, which is non-aggressiveness, moha, which is ignorance, and amoha, which is wisdom. Now these 6 are the causal conditions giving rise to the different feelings and thoughts that we have. I think this is the perfect time to introduce the Buddhist doctrine of dependent origination called Pratitya Samutpad. And I will do this with the background of a story. You remember the wandering ascetic Sanjay Bilattiputta from the Shramana sect? He had 2 disciples, Mahamoggallana and Sariputta, who joined the Buddhist Sangha and became great disciples of the Buddha. The story of their joining the Buddhist Sangha goes like this. Now, both Mahamoggallana and Sariputta were the chief disciples initially of Sanjay Bilattiputta. With him and his 250 other followers, they were staying in Rajagriha. And the two had promised each other that whoever of the two will first attain to the deathless and sorrowless state, he will inform the other. Remember the 5 former associates of Gautam Buddha who became arhats after hearing his first sermon? Now, one of them, whose name was Assaji, was in Rajagriha during this time. And Sariputta happened to see him while Assaji was collecting alms from the houses there. His persona was so impressive that people of the town were so irresistibly charmed by his gaze, his walk, his stretching out his arm to receive the alms, his modestly downcast eyes. I mean, his whole demeanor was extremely captivating. Sariputta too was impressed by him, and he thought to himself, he must be a priest who is either a saint already or has entered the path which conducts to saintship. What if I now draw near to this priest and ask him, to follow whom, brother, did you retire from the world? Who is your teacher and whose doctrine do you approve? So he followed Assaji and came out of the city and respectfully said to him, "Placid brother, are all your organs of sense. Clear and bright is the color of your skin. To follow whom, brother, did you retire from the world? Who is your teacher and whose doctrine do you approve?" Sariputta then asked him about Assaji replied to him. He said, "Brother, there is a great monk, one who has retired from the world out of the Shakya clan. To follow this blessed one have I retired from the world, and this blessed one is my teacher, and the doctrine of this blessed one do I approve." Sariputta asked him about the doctrine his teacher proclaimed. Assaji then told Sariputta that he would not be a fit person to explain the doctrine to him, as he is just a beginner. But he would still try to give him a brief idea about the doctrine, and he described it as follows. Assaji says, "The Buddha hath the causes told of all things springing from a cause, and also how things cease to be. It is this the mighty monk proclaims." This description gave Sariputta definite and precise understanding of the doctrine that if something has an origin, then it has an end too. And he said that this doctrine indeed leads one to the state of sorrowlessness. And when Mahamoggallana saw Sariputta approaching towards him, he was astonished to see the placid, calm look on his face. He also noticed the clear and bright color of his skin. So he asked Sariputta about this transformation. And as promised, Sariputta told him that he had attained the deathless, sorrowless state. And he explained to Mahamoggallana the entire episode that occurred and the doctrine that Assaji's teacher, the Buddha, had proclaimed. On hearing about the doctrine, Mahamoggallana too had a clear and definite vision of how things originate from a cause and how things cease to be. And he too attained the sorrowless, deathless state. And from then on, the two became the chief disciples of Buddha. Now, what exactly is this theory of causation, which is technically called the doctrine of dependent origination or Pratitya Samutpad? In the simplest way possible, one can understand it as a theory which suggests that from one thing the other thing arises. In a little technical manner, one can understand it as a theory which explains how the past, present, and the future birth of an individual are related to each other. But as students of philosophy, we need to delve into the doctrine to understand what it means. The term Pratitya Samutpad is made up of two words. The word Samutpad means arising, and the prefix Pratitya means leaning or depending. So we get the translation dependent origination, which implies when this is, that comes to be. On the arising of that, this arises. When this is not, that is not. On the cessation of that, this ceases. And as the name suggests, it is a theory which states emphatically that the world is not made up of some fixed or static constituents, but it is a dynamic, complex arrangement of different causes and effects. The world is in the continuous process of change. At the mental level, this process of change is in the form of desires, cravings, and their gratifications. At the physical level, this process of change is in the form of birth, death, and rebirth. And at the cosmic level, this process of change is in the form of the creation and destruction of the various galaxies. Let us understand the wheel of dependent origination which runs through an individual's past life, present life, and his future life. It in fact is the worldly life cycle of an individual. I will first mention the 12 links of the wheel of dependent origination or Pratitya Samutpad, and then explain how it builds as a as a law of causation. Now, the 12 links are: number 1, there is suffering in our life in the form of old age, death, sorrow, grief and anguish. But why is it so? Because we are born, rather reborn. But why? Because there is a will to be born. And why is that? Because of the attachment with the objects of this world. And why is that? Because we desire to hold on to the objects of this world. Why is that? Because we have a physical feeling or sensation of the objects of this world. And why is that? Because of the contact between the object and the sense organs. And why is that? Because we have the 6 sense organs. And why is that? Because of our name and form, which make us a psychophysical being. And why is that? Because of consciousness. And why is that? Because of the impressions of karmas. And why is that? Because of ignorance in the past life. Buddha, just after attaining enlightenment, sat at the foot of the Bodhi tree for 7 days, reflecting on Pratitya Samutpad, both forward and backward, and realized that what is responsible for our sufferings and the continuity of our births is ignorance of the 4 noble truths. Now let us see how it appears if we move from backwards. The ignorance or avidya of the 4 noble truths in a past life creates samskaras or impressions when one performs actions out of ignorance. And these sanskaras or impressions lead an individual to vijnana or birth consciousness of the present life. This vijnana or birth consciousness gives rise to name and form, nama-rupa, which constitutes the mental and physical faculties of the individual. From nama-rupa develop the 6 sense organs or shadayatanas. These 6 sense organs lead to their contact or sparsha with the compatible objects. This contact leads to vedana or sensation, which is either pleasant or painful or neither pleasant nor painful. These sensations or the physical and mental feelings give rise to desire or trishna to enjoy the objects of this world. And this is a crucial point because this determines the future of the individual. If at this stage one does not control one's desire, then one is sure to be born again. But if, on the other hand, one holds back and keeps a tight check on his desires, then there is a possibility of his being rescued and freed from this cycle. Anyway, from trishna or desire arises attachment or upadana. From upadan or attachment originates bhava or will to be born. And this will to be born leads to birth or jati in the next life. And when birth happens, it brings with it old age, death, jara marana and sufferings in all its forms. As I said while explaining the first 2 points, that avidya and karma relate to the past life of an individual. The last 2, namely jati and jara marana, refer to the future life of the individual. while the rest of the 8, namely Vijnana, Namarupa, Shadayatana, Sparsha, Vedna, Trishna, Upadan and Bhava, are related to the present life of the individual. So, Buddha realized that ignorance or avidya of the 4 noble truths is the root cause of suffering. But if ignorance disappears, it will lead to the cessation of karmas. And if karmas are stopped, consciousness will fade away. And with the fading away of consciousness, name and form will disappear. With the disappearance of name and form, the 6 sense organs cease to exist. If the 6 sense organs do not exist, then there will be no contact with the objects. And if there is no contact, there is no sensation. And if there is no sensation, there is no desire. And if there is no desire, there is no attachment. If there is no attachment, there is no will to be born. And if there is no will to be born, there is no birth. And if there is no birth, there is no old age, death or suffering. Now this is the theory of causation proclaimed by the Buddha. And see how it supports the Buddhist theory of impermanence. Now I will discuss what Buddha has to say on Nirvana. One might be tempted to ask one question from the Buddha, and that would be, is it really such a bad thing to be born? Is life only gloomy, sorrowful and depressing? Well, this is the reason why some people have branded Buddhist philosophy as negative and pessimistic. Is it also not true that people by and large would give primacy to a life with family and friends, pursuing their passions, enjoying holidays and so on? For them, Nirvana surely is something radical and harsh kind of a way out. But that is okay. But remember, Buddha was a prince before he became a wandering ascetic. He was surrounded by the pleasures of this world, and he forfeited those pleasures, the luxuries of life. From what we have so far gathered, it is easy to understand, perceive and interpret that the sufferings of life definitely overweigh the pleasures of life. And so, there is no point in calling Buddhism pessimistic and negative. In fact, Buddha has made things crystal clear and uncomplicated for us, as he declared, I have reached this element of things which is deep, difficult to see, difficult to understand, tranquil, excellent, not within the access of mere logic, subtle, and to be experienced only by the wise, each for himself. The multitude find delight in what they cling to. They are attached to it and rejoice over it. It is difficult indeed for them to apprehend this position of samsara, namely the causal determination of all occurrences. In fact, to apprehend also this position of nirvana, namely that it is the subsidence of all predisposition towards the form of creation, the relinquishment of all ideas of belongings, the extinction of desire, the dispassion, the cessation, the ultimate. The concept of nirvana, as I stated earlier, emerges from the third noble truth, which states there is cessation of suffering. And this is the ultimate goal of life in Buddhism. Nirvana literally means ceasing to be or extinction. But what is it that ceases to be? what becomes extinct? This needs to be understood. Nirvana or extinction happens in two stages. Stage 1 pertains to nirvana in this life. It is the stage of enlightenment which puts an end to the desires, passions, and hostilities. It is the free state of consciousness, the tranquil state of our internal nature, and the highest emotional state of spirituality and blessedness. So, this is a transformed state of consciousness, and it guarantees the second stage of nirvana, which is the stage of the death of the enlightened one, the stage of the extinction of the process of rebirth, as it is also stage of the extinction of the 5 skandhas of form, feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness. Let us also understand the 2 stages from the point of view of karma. Now, the first stage of nirvana in this life is about exhausting the accumulated karmas from the past lives. So it is basically cessation of suffering with the residual karmas. The second stage of nirvana at death is about the exhaustion of all the accumulated karmas. So it is cessation of suffering without any residual karmas. And since there are no karmas left, there will be no rebirth. Now, the second stage is referred to as Parinirvana when it is applied to the Buddha. The Buddha declared, to attain Parinirvana is to see the fire of life extinguished in that elemental condition of extinction which allows no residuum of possibility for reignition. Many people asked Buddha about what happens to the Arhat after death. Is he reborn after death, or he is not reborn after death? Is he reborn and not reborn after death, or is he neither reborn nor not reborn after death? The Buddha remained silent on these questions, for he did not want to commit himself to any one-sided view. And these metaphysical questions on which Buddha remained silent are regarded as the avyaktas in the Buddhist tradition. However, on seeing one inquirer by the name Agivachagota confused, Buddha decided to explain to him the reason of his silence. And it is a beautiful dialogue, and I will narrate it to you. Gautama Buddha said, "What do you think, Vacha? Suppose a fire were to burn in front of you, would you be aware that the fire was burning in front of you?" Vacha said, "Gautama, if a fire were to burn in front of me, I should be aware of that. A fire was burning in front of me." Buddha said, "But suppose, Vacha, someone were to ask you, on what does this fire that is burning in front of you depend? What would you answer, Vacha?" Vacha said, "Gautama, if someone were to ask me, I would answer, Gautama, it is on fuel of grass and wood that this fire burning in front of me depends." Buddha said, "But Vacha, if the fire in front of you were to become extinct, would you be aware that the fire in front of you had become extinct?" Vacha said, "Gautama, if the fire in front of me were to become extinct, I should be aware that the fire in front of me had become extinct. Gautama said, "But Vacha, if someone were to ask you, in which direction has that fire gone, east or west or north or south, what would you say, O Vacha?" Vacha said, "The question would not fit the case, Gautama, for the fire which depended on fuel of grass and wood, when the fuel has all gone and it can get no other, being thus without nutriment, is said to be extinct." Buddha said, "In exactly the same way, Vacha, all rupa by which one could predicate the existence of the arhat, all that rupa has been abandoned, uprooted, pulled out of the ground like a palmyra tree, and become non-existent and not liable to spring up again in the future. The arhat, O Vacha, who has been released from what is styled like rupa, is deep, immeasurable, unfathomable, like the mighty ocean. To say that he is reborn would not fit the case. To say that he is not reborn would not fit the case. To say that he is both reborn and not reborn would not fit the case. To say that he is neither reborn nor not reborn would not fit the case." So, for Buddha, the important thing was not speculating about what nirvana is. Rather, it was the striving for it. He would often compare people who asked him metaphysical questions like, "What happens after nirvana?" to a man wounded by an arrow, and instead of taking the arrow out of his body, asked irrelevant questions like, "Who shot it? What was his caste? How far was he standing?" Buddha said, "For people, it is sufficient to know that nirvana is the extinction of suffering and rebirth, and that is it." At this point, remind yourself, students, of the calm, peaceful, poised look of Buddha with a half smile in the Buddhist artwork. That explains everything about nirvana. Let us now move to the ethical aspect of suffering, which is declared in the fourth noble truth, which states that there is a way leading to the cessation of suffering, the way that leads one from samsara to nirvana. And it involves following the 8 practices formally called the Noble Eightfold Path or the Ashtangika Marga. These 8 practices are in fact a list of virtuous acts which ensure that the agent resolutely and unwaveringly follows the Madhyama Pratipat or the middle path doctrine. The Noble Eightfold Path, you will find, prescribes a course of action and approach which lies between a life of indulgence and a life of severe austerities. Before moving further, let us keep in mind that the Buddhists do not believe in God or a creator of this world. So, what could be the motivating factor for them to act morally? If, for example, I know that under no circumstance I would be caught on stealing a diamond necklace from a diamond store, would I still do that? Most likely, no. Not because I'm a strict follower of the moral code of conduct of the society, but because I'm scared, as I believe that I'll be punished by the God if I do so. But what could be the answer for the Buddhists to stick to morality? There are 2 possible answers. The first answer comes from their belief in the theory of karma. If a person steals, he will be born in the Pretaloka or in hell in his next life. which is quite an unfavorable circumstance. Likewise, if one performs good actions or refrains from doing bad actions in one's lifetime, then one can get a boarding pass to heaven. So, it bears good results if one refrains from stealing, as it makes one eligible for future pleasures and a happy life. But does that make one eligible for nirvana? No. And we know that not everyone aspires for nirvana, so it doesn't matter. The second answer comes from their belief in rebirth. Buddha talks about 3 kinds of kleshas or evils. They are greed, hatred, and delusion. Once a person gets caught in either of these, he will be trapped in a loop where the end is connected to the beginning, in the sense that if out of greed one steals something, he will experience intense urge to steal on other occasions as well, and he will lose sight of the truth that nothing is permanent, and will fall prey to the endless cycles of rebirth. So, keeping this in mind, he follows the noble Eightfold Path, which negates or annuls the 3 evils, but this time as an aspirant of nirvana, because the Eightfold Path is a necessary condition for gaining the insight that leads to nirvana. Now let us study the 8 practices enumerated in the Noble Eightfold Path. They are right view, which is samyak drishti, right intention, which is samyak sankalpa, right speech, which is samyak vacha, right action, samyak karma, right livelihood, samyak ajivika, right effort, samyak vyavahara, right mindfulness, samyak pragya, and right concentration, samyak samadhi. These 8 practices are divided into 3 groups, namely wisdom, morality, and meditation. The first 2 practices represent wisdom, the next 3 represent morality, and the last 3 practices correspond to meditation. These 8 virtuous practices equally reinforce each other, so that the expertise and comprehension of one will involve a likewise participation of the rest. In fact, Buddha's philosophy can be summarized in just these 2 principles: the 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. The first is about the understanding of the doctrines of the system, while the second, that is Eightfold Path, is about the practice of the discipline. So, the 2 principles form the Dhamma of the system, and together they successfully eliminate the problem of suffering by the root. Now let us understand the 8 practices enunciated in the Eightfold Path. First is right view or samyak drishti. Now right view precedes all the other practices of the path. It enables us to understand our current situation and our goal. So basically it gives us a sense of direction. It is a guide which decodes the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the path that leads to this end of suffering. In our life, we entertain views which shape our personality, lead our feelings and attitudes, and govern our actions. In a nutshell, our views hold the potential to either release us or bind us to this world. However, right view operates at 2 levels depending upon the stage of the individual. The first is the mundane right view, which operates at the worldly level, and it is concerned with the laws governing material and spiritual progress within the round of becoming, with the principles that lead to higher and lower states of existence, to mundane happiness and suffering. The second is the supramundane right view, which leads to nirvana, as it is concerned with the principles essential to liberation. It does not aim merely at spiritual progress from life to life, but at emancipation from the cycle of recurring lives and deaths. And here one has a clear understanding of the Four Noble Truths. The second is right intention or samyak sankalpa. Right intention presupposes right view. Knowing what righteousness is not enough unless one has an intention to be righteous, which is why it is second in the list. Right intention includes within it the intention of renunciation, goodwill, and harmlessness. But there are wrong intentions also, which correspondingly counter and run parallel to the right intentions, and one is expected to overcome them in order to achieve the goal of rooting out of the suffering. When Buddha was meditating in the forest, he found that his thoughts could be distributed into two different classes. In one, he put thoughts of desire, ill will, and harmfulness. In the other, thoughts of renunciation, goodwill, and harmlessness. Whenever he noticed thoughts of the first kind arise in him, he understood that those thoughts lead to harm for oneself and others, obstruct wisdom, and lead away from nibbana or nirvana. Reflecting in this way, he expelled such thoughts from his mind and brought them to an end. But whenever thoughts of the second kind arose, he understood those thoughts to be beneficial, conducive to the growth of wisdom, aids to the attainment of nibbana or nirvana. Thus, he strengthened those thoughts and brought them to completion. The next three practices which deal with the moral behavior of an individual actually lay the foundation for him to tread on the path, as these purify his mind. So, the first among them is, which is number 3 in the practices, and that is right speech, samyak vacha. Now, right speech has been divided into 4 parts by the Buddha, and these are refraining from falsehood, refraining from backbiting, refraining from harsh talk, and refraining from idle chatter. Speech can have far more adverse effects on people than the ones brought about by physically inflicting of pains on them. Speech can either bring peace, solace, or motivation to someone, or it can even bring mental disturbance, hostilities, agony, to the extent of raising wars. So, it can enable an individual to move towards excellence, and at the same time, it can push him to degradation. The insensitivity in our speech can lead us away from the contemplative path. Now, let's move on to the 4th practice, which is right action or samyak karma. Right action means abstaining from wrongful deeds, which involves 5 components. Number 1 is abstaining from killing. 2. Abstaining from stealing. 3. Abstaining from sensual pleasures. 4. Abstaining from false speech. And 5. Abstaining from any kind of intoxication. In fact, these 5 abstinences constitute the Buddhist precepts or Panchashila. Now, abstinence from killing in its primary sense means refraining from taking somebody's life. But in its secondary sense, it means refraining from injuring or torturing someone without killing him. Abstinence from stealing can also be understood comprehensively when we include within it not just pickpocketing, bag snatching or robbery, but also activities like cheating customers, deceiving someone, or fraudulently taking possession of someone's property. And we know that such actions are caused by feelings of hatred and greed, which are evils according to Buddha. Now, abstinence from sensual pleasures includes the practice of chastity and self-control. Abstinence from false speech involves the practice of honesty and sincerity, and abstinence from intoxication includes refraining from alcoholic drinks and drugs. Then number 5 or the 5th practice is right livelihood, which is Samyak Ajivika. It means one should engage in an occupation which causes no harm to others. So, it is living a righteous life. According to the Buddha, there are 5 kinds of livelihood which are to be avoided as they bring harm to others, and they are dealing in weapons, or dealing in living beings, which includes raising animals for slaughter as well as slave trade. Then dealing in meat production and butchery, in poisons and in intoxicants. He further names several dishonest means of earning which fall under wrong livelihood, and they are practicing deceit, treachery, fortune telling, trickery, and even lending money. Now, the next 3 practices which I am going to discuss now, they train the mind for meditation. So, the 6th practice which is following is right effort or Samyak Vyavahara. It is a crucial practice. Buddha has shown the path, that we all know, that he has given us the marga or shown us the path, but one has to work for one's own deliverance or liberation. So, effort on one's own part is important. And what is behind effort? Energy. And this positive energy has the potentiality to transform the defiled, afflicted and deluded mind to a purified mind which is liberated and illumined. Buddha preached his disciples that the goal is not unattainable if one makes a determined effort. So, right effort involves 4 great endeavors, and they are: number 1, to prevent the arising of unarisen, unwholesome states. Number 2, to abandon unwholesome states that have already arisen. Number 3, to arouse wholesome states that have not yet arisen. And 4, to maintain and perfect wholesome states already arisen. Now, number 7 or the 7th practice is right mindfulness or Samyak Pragya. Buddha declared that the Dhamma or the truth is always available to us. It only needs to be realized. One does not have to depend on books or teachers or logic in order to grasp it. We just need to understand our experiences and dive deep into the foundations where they lie. And what plays an important role here to get everything in focus is mindfulness. So, in right mindfulness, the mind is trained to remain in the present, open, quiet and alert, contemplating the present event. All judgments and interpretations have to be suspended, or if they occur, just registered and dropped. Now, the deluded mind, covered by ignorance, cannot see things as they are. So, mindfulness brings to light experience in its pure immediacy. It reveals the object as it is before it has been plastered over with conceptual paint overlaid with interpretations. The Buddha declares to the monks. And what, monks, is right mindfulness? Herein a monk dwells contemplating the body in the body, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having put away covetousness and grief concerning the world. He dwells contemplating feelings in feelings, states of mind in states of mind, phenomena in phenomena, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having put away covetousness and grief concerning the world. Now, the eighth and the last practice is right concentration, which is Samyak Samadhi. It means centering the mind on its object. The mind, which otherwise moves in all directions like a fish flapping around on a dry ground when thrown out of the water. But a trained mind, free from distractions, is focused on its object. So, right concentration is a state of intensified concentration that results from a deliberate attempt to raise the mind to a higher, more purified level of awareness. Now, there are 8 stages of concentration. The first 4 stages considered together are called the 4 jhanas. The second 4 also considered together are the 4 immaterial states called arupa. These 8 stages must be reached in a successive manner, as the later stage depends on the former. The first jhana is that stage in which the aspirant, secluded from the immoral states and accompanied by initial and continued attentiveness of the mind, is filled with rapture and happiness. The second jhana is that stage in which the initial and continued attentiveness of the mind settles down and the aspirant gains inner confidence and mental unification, and thereby overflows with rapture and happiness born out of concentration. The third jhana is the stage in which rapture and happiness fades away and the aspirant dwells in equanimity. The fourth is the stage of purity of mindfulness born out of equanimity. Now, in it, the aspirant feels neither pain nor pleasure. Now, let us discuss the next 4 immaterial states of concentration, and they are so subtle that they cannot be explained verbally. These states are attained by replacing gross objects by the subtler ones. Now, the 4 attainments are named after their respective objects: the base of infinite space, the base of infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness, and the base of neither perception nor non-perception. But these 8 stages still lack something which is required for nirvana, and that is the wisdom of insight, which is about momentary concentration or kshanika samadhi. It is not one pointed awareness of an object, it is even more sophisticated kind of concentration. Here, the aspirant focuses on the changing states of mind and body without clinging to a single state. Gradually, his concentration becomes stronger moment after moment until it becomes established one-pointedly on the constantly changing streams of events. And ultimately, the aspirant reaches the last stage of wisdom and attains nirvana. And that is it for today. Thank you so much.